Johnny Carson was delivering a joke about President Nixon's approval ratings when a man in the back row of the Tonight Show audience suddenly stood up and remained standing, completely silent, staring straight ahead. The audience thought it was a disruption, maybe a protester, but Johnny kept going. Then another man stood up in the middle section, then another near the front, all of them standing at attention without saying a word. By the time Johnny realized what was happening and who these men were, half the studio was on their feet, and what followed would become the most haunting moment in television history. November 8, 1972. The Tonight Show was in its second segment, riding the comfortable rhythm of a Wednesday night taping. Johnny had just finished interviewing Bob Newhart, who'd left the audience in stitches with a story about a disastrous golf game with Don Rickles. The mood in NBC Studio One was light, warm, exactly what America needed in 1972, a year when the war still dominated headlines despite promises of peace. Johnny was about to introduce musical guest Vicky Carr when he noticed something odd in the audience dynamics. Throughout the crowd of 300, there were men who weren't laughing at the right moments. Not heckling, not disrupting, just present. They were scattered seemingly at random, one in the back row, a couple in the middle sections, several down front. They wore civilian clothes, but something about their posture, their haircuts, the way they held themselves, suggested military. Their eyes weren't tracking Johnny's movements like the rest of the audience. They were staring at something beyond the stage, something only they could see. The show continued normally. Johnny launched into a bit about the price of coffee reaching an all-time high. "Pretty soon we'll need to take out a loan just to wake up in the morning," he quipped, getting the expected laugh. But as the laughter died down, one of those serious men, back row left side, slowly stood up. He didn't say anything, didn't move forward, just stood at perfect attention, hands at his sides, eyes forward. An NBC page started moving toward him, assuming he needed the restroom or was having some kind of issue. But the man didn't acknowledge the page, didn't move, didn't even blink. He just stood there like a statue. The people around him shifted uncomfortably. Johnny noticed the commotion, but kept going with his monologue, professional as always. These things happened in live television. Drunk audience members, protesters, people wanting attention. The pages would handle it. But then, as Johnny delivered his next setup about airline food, another man stood up. Middle section, right side. Same posture, same silence, same 1,000-yard stare. Then another, front left. Then two more simultaneously near the center. By the time the seventh man stood up, Johnny stopped mid-sentence. The joke died on his lips. "Folks, is something happening I should know about?" His voice carried that mixture of confusion and attempted humor that usually diffuse strange situations. But none of the standing men responded. They remained at attention, scattered throughout the studio like silent sentinels. Ed McMahon shifted nervously at his desk. "Johnny, maybe we should—" But before Ed could finish, an eighth man stood, then a ninth, then three more in quick succession. The audience was murmuring now, some frightened, others confused. A woman near one of the standing men tugged at his sleeve, asking if he was all right, but he didn't even glance down. The NBC pages had stopped trying to intervene, realizing this was coordinated, purposeful. "Gentlemen," Johnny said, abandoning his cards entirely, "if you're trying to make a point, you have my attention." Finally, one of the men, front row center, maybe 35 years old with prematurely gray hair, broke his stare and looked directly at Johnny. When he spoke, his voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in a while. "We were told you'd understand." "Understand what?" Johnny asked. "The standing man." The phrase meant nothing to most of the audience, but Johnny's face changed completely. His hand went to the edge of his desk for support. The standing man was military slang from Vietnam. When a soldier was killed, his squad would sometimes stand one man at attention during mail call where the dead soldier used to stand, a silent acknowledgement that someone was missing. More men were standing now, 15, 20, 25. All at attention, all silent except for the one who'd spoken. The studio had gone completely quiet except for the hum of the lights. "Are you all—" Johnny couldn't finish the question. "Vietnam. Different units, different years. But we all lost someone. Someone who watched your show. Someone who talked about coming home to watch it with their families." The man's voice cracked slightly. "We're standing for them." The camera caught Johnny's hands trembling as more men rose. 30, 35, 40 men now standing at attention throughout the studio. "Tell me their names," Johnny said quietly, his voice barely carrying through the studio microphones. The gray-haired veteran looked surprised. "Sir? The ones you're standing for. Tell me their names." The man's composure cracked slightly. "Private First Class Danny Thompson, 19 years old, from Cedar Rapids. Loved your show. Said when he got home, he was going to get tickets to sit right where I'm sitting now." His voice caught. "He didn't get home." Another standing man, older, weathered, spoke from the middle section. "Corporal Rick Martinez, 22. We watched you every Thursday when we could get signal. He did impressions of you to keep us sane. KIA June 4th, 1968. I'm standing where he should be standing." Then another. "Lieutenant Bobby Chen. Kept your picture from TV Guide taped inside his helmet. Said it reminded him of normal. Died saving 3 of us." One by one, the standing men began speaking names. Not shouting, not dramatic, just stating facts. Names, ages, hometowns, how they died. The cameras caught Johnny's face crumbling with each name. Ed McMahon had his head in his hands. Doc Severinsen had turned away from the audience entirely. The sitting audience members were frozen, many crying as they realized they were surrounded by ghosts. Not the men standing, but the invisible army of the dead they were representing. More men kept rising. 50 now, then 60. Some were young, maybe just back from tours. Others were older, wearing their civilian clothes like uncomfortable costumes. A few had visible injuries, a limp, a missing hand, scars. But they all stood at perfect attention. "How many?" Johnny finally asked, his voice breaking. "How many are you standing for?" The gray-haired veteran looked around the studio at his fellow veterans, all standing now. 73 men total, nearly a quarter of the audience. "Every man standing here lost at least one close friend who watched your show. Some of us lost entire squads. We never got to have a proper memorial. This is our memorial." The weight of it was crushing. 73 veterans standing for hundreds of dead soldiers who'd never watched The Tonight Show again. Johnny Carson stood up from behind his desk, something he almost never did during the show. He walked to the center of the stage, looking at the 73 standing veterans, and then he did something that stunned everyone. He snapped to attention himself. The king of late night, the man who made America laugh, was standing at military attention on his own stage. "I served in the Navy," Johnny said, his voice thick with emotion. 1943 to 1946. I never saw combat. I decoded encrypted messages on a ship that never fired a shot in anger. I came home untouched, while better men didn't come home at all. Tears were running down his face now. I've spent 30 years making people laugh, but I never once used this platform to acknowledge what you men did, what you lost, who you lost. He turned to the cameras. America, look at these men. They're standing for friends who died at 18, 19, 20 years old. Boys who watched this show in bunkers and hospitals and jungle camps, who dreamed of coming home to watch it on their mother's couches. His voice broke completely. And we've ignored them. I've ignored them. The gray-haired veteran broke his attention stance. Mr. Carson, we didn't come here to— No, Johnny interrupted. You came here to remember them. So let's remember them. All of them. He walked to the veteran. What was Danny Thompson's favorite joke from the show? The man's eyes filled with tears. The one about the elephant and the Volkswagen. He told it wrong every time, but laughed anyway. Johnny turned to another veteran. Tell me about Rick Martinez. He wrote down your monologues and letters home. His mom still has them. Dozens of letters full of your jokes. For the next 20 minutes, The Tonight Show became something it had never been, a memorial service. Johnny went to every standing veteran, asking about the men they were representing. The cameras captured stories of boys who died clutching letters from home, who used humor to cope with horror, who talked about The Tonight Show like it was a lifeline to sanity. Finally, Johnny returned to center stage. Gentlemen, please be seated. You've stood long enough. As the veterans sat, Johnny remained standing. But I'm going to keep standing, for them, for all of them. Johnny remained standing at attention as he spoke directly to the camera. We're going to do something different tonight. No more guests, no more comedy. Doc, do you know taps? Doc Severinsen nodded solemnly and raised his trumpet. As the haunting notes of taps filled the studio, Johnny slowly saluted. All 73 veterans rose again and saluted with him. The audience was completely silent except for muffled sobs. The cameras captured tears streaming down the faces of grown men who hadn't cried since Vietnam. When the last note faded, Johnny lowered his salute but stayed standing. I want every American watching to know something. These men came here with no organization, no plan. They bought tickets separately, sat randomly, and stood up because they couldn't carry this alone anymore. He looked at the veterans. How did you all know to come tonight? The gray-haired veteran spoke again. We didn't. It just happened. I was here visiting my sister in L.A. Saw you were taping. Got a ticket. Then I saw another vet in the audience. Then another. We just knew. We all knew. Johnny turned back to the camera. Tomorrow, NBC will receive thousands of calls asking what this was about. This wasn't planned. This wasn't a stunt. This was 73 men who couldn't hold their ghosts alone anymore. His voice grew stronger. So here's what we're going to do. Every Veterans Day from now on, The Tonight Show will reserve seats, empty seats, for the ones who can't be here. The phone on Johnny's desk rang. Fred de Cordova answered, his face going pale. He whispered to Johnny, who took the phone. The audience watched as Johnny listened, his expression changing. He hung up and faced the audience. That was the Pentagon. They've been watching. They want to create a memorial wall with the names mentioned tonight. They want to know if the families— He looked at the veterans. Would the families want that? The veterans nodded, many unable to speak. Johnny walked among them, shaking each hand, and the show ended not with the usual theme music, but with complete silence. The credits rolled over the image of 73 veterans embracing each other, no longer standing alone. Within 48 hours, NBC received over 200,000 letters containing names of soldiers who died in Vietnam. Families wrote about sons who'd watched Johnny from field hospitals, husbands who talked about the show in their last letters home, brothers who'd never made it back to their living room TVs. Johnny read every single letter personally, a task that took him months. His secretary later revealed he'd often close his office door, and she'd hear him crying as he read. The 73 veterans from that night formed an informal group, meeting monthly in Los Angeles. They called themselves the Standing Men, and by 1975, chapters had formed in every major city. They didn't march or protest. They simply stood, at ball games, at parades, at public events, silent reminders of those who couldn't stand. Johnny privately funded their travel to reunions, never publicizing it, never taking credit. On Veterans Day 1973, exactly 1 year later, The Tonight Show featured 58 empty seats in the audience, one for each 1,000 Americans killed in Vietnam. Johnny did the entire show speaking to those empty chairs as if they were full, acknowledging them, including them in his monologue. It became an annual tradition until his retirement. Network executives initially resisted, saying it was too heavy for entertainment, but Johnny threatened to walk if they interfered. The gray-haired veteran, whose name was Paul Morrison, became a regular correspondent with Johnny. In a letter found after Johnny's death in 2005, Paul wrote, "You gave us permission to grieve in public. For 10 years we'd been hiding our ghosts. That night, you let us stand for them." Johnny had written back, "You taught me that comedy means nothing if we can't occasionally stop laughing to remember why we're free to laugh at all." The most powerful legacy came in 1985 when Danny Thompson's mother, the soldier Paul Morrison had stood for, sent Johnny a photo. It showed Danny in Vietnam, sitting on sandbags with his squad, watching a small TV they'd rigged up. On the screen, barely visible but unmistakable, was Johnny Carson. The note read, "This was taken 2 days before he died. Thank you for giving him joy in hell and for remembering him in peace."